And the hard part is starting with good data, and that's not possible to achieve. Then what are you doing? You're building an architecture with a lot of software and processes. You're not really solving the data problem. So yeah, really fortunate that, all the pieces, and that's what's kept me so motivated and excited about solving the problem, is because the market has started to see it. In the early days, no one understood what I was trying to do. Like investors, customers, even recruiting people, it was challenging because no one really saw the problem the way I could see it at the time.
Welcome to the Startup CEO Show. I'm your host, Mark MacLeod. In this episode, I sit down with Stephany Lapierre, founder and CEO of Tealbook. Tealbook began as a services business leveraging Stephany's deep domain expertise, but she turned it into a software business 9 years ago. Stephany is a solo founder, and it's hard enough doing a business with co-founders. She's doing it all by herself. We go deep into that journey, how she went from services to product, how she grew herself as a CEO, impact of COVID, re-platforming, how she built her leadership team, challenges of being a female founder in a male-dominated environment, and many, many more topics. I hope you enjoy the show. Stephany, welcome to the Startup CEO Show. It's a true pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
I'm good. Honored to be speaking with you today.
Sweet. We were just talking before we started about how impressive your wall is. So for anyone who's watching on YouTube, there's some wallpaper inspiration there. Would love to start with, the origin story, like how it is that you came up with the idea for Tealbook, especially since you don't come from a standard kind of founder background. How did you come up with this company?
I started a consulting practice 16 years ago. And the concept of the consulting business was to help large enterprise, people within large enterprise that are looking for innovation. And so the concept was to help match the business requirements of the organization with some suppliers that had either solved the problem for other clients, because often problems are not that unique, or come up with an innovative way to really differentiate or address a challenge. So that company was called Matchbook, and it started that way. We built a process that would make it really easy on the client side to identify suppliers that would bring innovation, which had a lot of parallels with procurement and the shift of procurement moving from a cost saving function to more value add function, with a focus on how do we deliver more value to our stakeholders within the company. And so it's sort of the parallels were being made by our clients really liking the process and asking my consulting firm to help them shape what the strategic sourcing function was going to look like. And so for a couple of years, I had the opportunity to work with really large enterprise customers who had a lot of procurement systems like SAP, Ariba, and others. And I kept noticing is that information about the suppliers was incredibly difficult to access across businesses. A lot of decentralized organizations, so different function, different organizations. And the management was trying to harness the information on their suppliers. And it was very difficult, especially when we're talking about having 10 or 50 or 100,000 suppliers globally. It was very disparate. Companies were trying to reduce the size of their supplier base, often by like this lofty goal of 50%, but they didn't know much, if anything at all, about the majority of their suppliers. So in my view, it's like, how do you optimize this investment on the suppliers that are already in contract and doing business if you don't know anything about them? And it was like, imagine a world where we're running revenue teams with no data on our customers or on our prospect customers. It was very similar. And I saw the day-to-day struggle of stakeholders trying to access basic things like, who do we use for X, Y, and Z, and what are the contract terms, and what alternative suppliers are in our market that could bring more innovation or could be more competitive. So I saw it from a large company lens, and then a lot of my customers shifted to go to smaller companies. And at the time, it was very specific to pharmaceutical and biotech. And so during the biotech boom, 2009, 2010, my customers were building supply chain for the first time. So they're raising large rounds of capital. They had maybe 12 to 18 months to bring a product to market. and they needed hundreds, if not thousands of suppliers. And so, initially it started very much like, Steph, we need X, Y, and Z. So we would help them find those suppliers to suddenly seeing like, hey, there's a very distinct life cycle that every company is facing. Is there a way to build a consulting firm that would help them build a procurement function out of the gate that would be more scalable, transparent, enabling for the organization to be able to actually build sustainable, scalable, resilient supply chain? And then I started seeing very quickly with the lens of, if we could start this from a clean slate, could we make it better? And very quickly realize that as we start introducing and implementing system to try to automate, sourcing, contract, payment, etc., that we were actually creating a lot of disparity. And very quickly, we lost sight of, the information that we needed. And suddenly you lack transparency. It was unscalable. You sort of patch it with manual processes, a lot of swivel chair between these systems. And you lost that macro view of, how to optimize the investment. So it was a 9-year process of trying to kill this idea that this is a data problem. It's not a software, people, or process problem. If we could find a way to sort of harness this data and make it more consumable, deliver better insight, or even distribute better quality information on suppliers across all these systems and these functions that need it to deliver business outcome, I think this could be a pretty big idea. And we saw over time that this was not just, a reality for pharma and biotech. This was systemic across every single organization, no matter the maturity, no matter the stage of their digital transformation or the sector. And so I saw it as a really big problem to solve. And so I've been on this journey now for roughly 8 years to try to solve it. And it is a really hard problem to solve. That's why no one had solved it before.
Wow. What a journey. It's funny. I'm amazed that your clients would be big enough to be considered enterprise and not actually have this kind of infrastructure in place. Kind of blows my mind. But then again, I don't come from the enterprise world, so I'm blissfully ignorant. Were you reluctant to move to this next phase? Like, did you sort of reluctantly say, oh, shit, I guess I better create a software company? Or actually you were kind of enthusiastic about it?
I fought it. I fought it because, having 3 kids. And at the time before I start really putting the idea together, I had 2 daughters and then got pregnant with Sophie, my third daughter, while I was ideating on the process. But every customer I work with, I thought if they had this thing, it would solve so many of their problems. It would enable all these use cases that they're trying to solve through workflow and, portals. And so I did fight it. I found every way to kill the idea. My business, was generating 40% margin, but so profitable from basically the first year. I never borrowed money, never raised capital. And so it was pretty daunting to start a tech company. And I knew in order for this to actually fly, it would need to attain a certain critical mass, which would require capital and a lot of expertise to bring it to life. So I definitely spent 9 years trying to kill the concept, but it took over me. So
your company is a cockroach, unkillable. I like that.
Sort of. I'd probably save the same analogy for my resilience. And
yeah, exactly. That's exactly. Yeah, those are 100% correlated. And so Tealbook is actually your 4th startup after your 3 children. That's pretty wild.
Well, it's my 3rd startup from a real business sense. My first business was when I was 18. I sold that and then took the proceed to be a ski bum for a year in Whistler and then started Matchbook 2006. Yeah, it was wild. About 2006. And then Tealbook really came to life in about 2015.
Wow, that's great. So, back when I was a VC, a long time ago in the dark ages, we really shied away from solo founder businesses because it's just so hard, building a startup and especially taking it all the way to where it can generate a return that moves the needle for a venture fund. It's hard enough to do with partners, and you did it by yourself. Would love to know how that journey has been for you, especially since you clearly had domain knowledge, but didn't come from like a software product management background. Just walk us through that. And, if you had a do-over, would you get a co-founder? Yeah, love to learn more.
Yeah, I would never do this by myself again. That's for sure. It's lonely. It's lonely. And the decision is a real tough decision, relies on me. But I heard the double-edged sword is you get partners and things don't work out. Or, at some point you get to, not everybody can scale with the business. And at some point you have to make these really difficult changes. It's easier in some ways if people are employees, even though they're executive in the company, to make those types of changes. And I've had to change my leadership team several times. So who knows, maybe the co-founder that would have been at the beginning would have not been, the right CTO, for example. So I do count my blessing, although, being a single founder it's really hard. It's consuming. Luckily, I'm really passionate about solving the problem, and the market has continued to validate that this is something, that needs to be solved. It's been accelerated with COVID because most enterprise that said, oh, I have good spend visibility or I have good, handle on my spend data, suddenly something that big happens. Spend is relevant, but it's not that particularly as useful as understanding where you have risk in your supply chain and where, you need to find alternative suppliers. Or then suddenly you get Black Lives Matter. It's that now you need to know who your suppliers are that are women-owned or, veteran-owned or small business-owned. And suddenly you get carbon emissions, something you need to stay, right? That the requirements have continued to compound in a way that it's impossible for enterprise today without having a solid data foundation to realize, and be able to, satisfy all these different regulations and requirements and all the disruption that will continue to happen. So really fortunate that the world of technology with AI, big data, and then also all the other sort of factors that have contributed to raising awareness of the importance of having good data. It all starts with good data. When you ask the enterprise, so how do you do this? Well, that's the hard bit. Well, if the hard part is starting with good data and that's not possible to achieve, then what are you doing? You're building an architecture with a lot of software and processes. You're not really solving the data problem. So yeah, really fortunate that, all the pieces, and that's what's kept me so motivated and excited about solving the problem, is because the market has started to see it. In the early days, no one understood what I was trying to do, like investors, customers, even recruiting people, it was challenging because no one really saw the problem the way I could see it at the time.
Yeah, I believe that. So you brought up COVID, and, I was thinking before we chatted that, when I think of like really sexy kind of vertical markets, or sectors, like supply chain's not top of the list for me, but supply chain was on everyone's lips during COVID. And because our supply chains were disrupted massively. And which brings up for me, I guess, what I think is the most important factor in the outcome of a startup, which is timing. So was COVID just a big accelerant for your business?
It was. It was in the way that it gave a lot of more sort of tangible use cases for data. So examples where we helped the Brooke brothers identify net new suppliers to be able to produce 100,000 PPE masks, within a couple of weeks. And they were producing that every day. They could have not been accelerated in the way that they could because of our platform. We set up the UK government with a database of 60,000 manufacturers of PPEs with contact information, with ISO certification, with year founded. It definitely gave software companies more awareness of the need to be able to partner and integrate our data. What I would say is that, in some ways we were, in the early days, we were quite underfunded when we started to develop the tech. And so the acceleration, we grew 350% that year. Our NDR went from 90 to 160, which gave us amazing metrics to raise Series A and Series B. But what we didn't anticipate is the tech was not ready for it. And so from a scalability perspective, we ended up running into a lot of, really big issues of how we were loading vendor masters of our customers who needed data faster, how we could refresh our pipeline so that we could, add more data and make sure that our data kept up to date, and we didn't have provenance. So we had challenges around overwriting some of the data that we already had in our platform. So it created, we sort of create a lot of issues for us, which we ended up sort of patching with people and processes and then deciding to rebuild the technology. And so in hindsight, if we had the tech that we've released recently and we're iterating on it, that has a lot more sophistication, a lot more scalability and efficiency in the way that we build the architecture, we would have been much better prepared to take full advantage of the growth that we experienced. We kind of have almost like a 2-year of like, we grew and then we had to reset to get the tech to where we need to be. The good news is the problem is not going away and no one's really solving it yet. But we also know that the technology is advanced at a pace that some components of the use cases that we used to focus on have become, much more commoditized. And so, staying ahead of that is really important for us.
That's fascinating. In my last operating role at FreshBooks, we went through a replatforming. The company was in the teens. Like it was an old original platform. And Mike, the CEO at the time, likened replatforming to changing the engines of a plane while it's flying. Was it that kind of daunting for you, or it wasn't too bad? I know I realize you're still midstream. But.
If I knew what I knew now, I would have probably not replatformed, frankly. I would have just upgraded components of it over time.
Yeah.
It was easy to understand the rationale of why we should replatform. Like the business case for doing it seemed more obvious. And then the timeline that we had set to do it were also pretty clear. I think the execution of it was more challenging. And I think the team that we had brought in were trying to solve all the problems of the old platform and bring a platform to market that was sort of, more complex, more sophisticated, but without having customers touching the data. And that was a big mistake. The first platform we built in very modular. And so we were able to expose data and refine and grow with it. As a second generation, we ended up with this very monolithic technology that we had to then decouple again. So it just created, it's more on the execution of it that we ended up facing some challenges. But if I knew what I know now, I would have probably taken a different path. And now I talk to founders who say, oh, you've replatformed. Oh, how was that? And I was like, no one said that to me, when we were considering replatforming, because I would have probably, or I didn't hear it, maybe I didn't hear it. I thought that we would be different, which is a great lesson learned for many of the other founders that may be listening to this right now. Look at carefully your options. And with the amount of investment, in a way, I remember at some point in the early days, we thought, let's give this to two separate teams. And we know we're going to throw away one of the two architecture, but it would have been less costly and it would have been more effective to do it this way because we could have brought something to market much faster. And so, we're fortunate. Our old technology, our legacy technology still works. We have hundreds of customers. We're able to satisfy their use cases. But this new platform, it solves so many other use cases at a scale and efficiency that will be unmatched when we're ready to roll it out prime time. We have customers on it now, but we're being very careful before releasing it until we've nailed the product and, we're able to press on the gas again.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would be careful, right? Like data can't be mostly accurate. It just needs to be 100% accurate, right? So that makes a ton of sense. I often joke that an accountant would never start a law firm. And so, you're running a software company, but not a software person. You've had to navigate, a very technical product for enterprise customers. It's probably got 100 different bells and whistles and SLAs and all that. And really two questions here. One is like, how do you lead the technology side of your business not being a technologist? Maybe start there as a first question.
So I was really fortunate that my first CTO, the first version I built with contractors. So I was very hands-on, and it gave me a lot of just basic knowledge on development and sort of the process of building a product and some of the technical challenges. My first CTO, once we raised institutional capital, was a very experienced engineer that had gone back to school and studied big data, machine learning, and a very thoughtful leader. So I was really fortunate that first CTO that built the like what we now call the legacy platform was very experienced and very technical. Now, other things were needed, like understanding the market so that we could provide feedback, from a product perspective, and meeting customer needs was super important. So I had that, which was great, and getting those first few logos in. So we were a great team. But when we did hire, so Jeff left after, and I knew coming in that he was not the CTO that was going to be here after Series A. It was very clear at the stage that he wanted to be involved. He was very hands-on keyboard. We looked for a CTO, and we didn't hire someone that at the time we were not looking to rebuild. And so I did bring advisors. Our board was quite involved in that process to make sure we hired the right person. And unfortunately, it didn't work out. And so, lots of learnings, lots of, there's a lot of time I surely spent wondering what we could have done differently, because it was very costly. But I think it all comes down to the people who you hire and who, trusting those people. And what we ended up adding is more governance around the execution. But yeah, it's definitely, I could have probably avoided some expensive mistakes if I was more technical, for sure. I oversimplify technology. I think it's magic. And so I will oversimplify things, which often, needs to be broken down, and then timelines are always too far out. I always think everything is possible. So I think it's good and bad, right? It has, again, a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I can see both sides of that, right? I mean, we see examples all the time of founders who, if they weren't naive, and I don't mean that in a bad way, would never ever attempt to do what the company does, and so they're blissfully ignorant, and then actually do it. Whereas if someone had the knowledge, to be like, "Oh no, that's impossible," right? So I think it's great to just think that anything's possible. I'm reminded, back in my CFO days, very early, might have been my third or fourth startup. It was a very technical, scalable storage software company. And the CEO, who was deeply technical, went on vacation for a week. And he's like, "All right, Mark, you just run the company." And I was trying to do stand-ups with the sales engineering team and figure out how we're going to deploy a customer and check in with R&D on the roadmap. And they might as well have been speaking a foreign language. So I kudos to you for figuring it out, because I couldn't. I was so grateful when that guy came back from vacation. It's like, you're never taking vacation again.
Well, what I find is I've heard this a few times where I really want to be transparent with the rest of the organization or even our customers. And I hear oh, they won't understand, this is too technical. And my view is that we're a tech company. We're a data company. If people don't care to really understand what constitute, our architecture or the data or the structure of the data or the complexity of it or what is quality record, you need to be interested or shouldn't be working for a tech company. That's sort of my view. And I tend to say don't underestimate people's ability to understand. Even if it sounds too technical, they'll retain some component of it, and it will make them also more confident when they're, in a position where they do have to explain or they have to answer a question. To solely depend on, sales engineer to answer customer question versus having the credibility to say actually X, Y, and Z, and pulling in the sales engineer when you really need, sort of deeper tech discussions around integrations or things like that. I think it's really powerful. So yeah, I would definitely suggest, make that part of your day-to-day and make sure that people are interested in learning about the tech. And especially for us, it's data. Our product is data. If people don't care about data or data quality, they shouldn't be working here.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Have you explicitly tried to learn technical? Have you been off just studying technology on the side, or it's just happening through osmosis, just through the process of building this company and product?
I think it would be really dangerous if I learned how to code or do anything like that. So no, nothing formal. I'm curious. I do like to sit, if I have an opportunity to sit in stand-ups or just listen carefully to some of the challenges, to develop a feature or to hit certain milestones and what understanding the risk. So I think as a founder, you need to be knowledge enough to be able to ask the right questions, and then be able to, step back out of it. But that's something I had to learn over time, is that it holds people accountable. If you know the few good questions to ask, they know that you relate and understand. Otherwise, they may gloss over things that are actually really important.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Back to co-founders and the pros and cons, and you brought up a really good point, right? Like half of marriages fail, and I'm certain half of co-founder relationships fail, if not more. But one thing the right co-founder brings is visibility, and like will be a mirror and be like, that's bullshit, or, whatever, just like give you feedback. And like, it's so hard to get feedback as a CEO. And then especially as a CEO doesn't have, a really close partner. So I'm just curious, like, how do you get feedback? How do you get input, and how do you keep getting better?
So I think I've been, from the very beginning, asking feedback. And that was really powerful when I raised capital, to even understanding what the problem we're trying to solve with customers. I love feedback. I ask for feedback all the time. And if we talk to customers, like, be transparent and constructive. That's the only way we can really get better. And it's true for, any conversations we have internally. I've been not blamed, but sort of criticized for listening to or taking too much feedback. But what I do when I ask for feedback is I synthesize the feedback, and then there's always a theme. There's always a nugget or a theme that keeps coming back. And then I apply it to my situation and what we need to do, and then use that to form a decision. Because, from the very beginning, I've never raised capital. I never raised a tech company. And there's like, some very basic questions that you need to figure out pretty quickly. I had to fight our trademark at some point against Facebook. I had to figure out like how to learn, trademark within a week and we got our trademark. So, I mean, every learning, is an opportunity to ask questions and ask for feedback. So, yeah. And sometimes feedback is hard to hear. And I've got multiple examples of that, and stepping away and understanding, why does this feedback come? And and I say this to my kids too, when someone says something, they really believe it. And so it's important to put yourself in their shoes, and from their lens, why do they believe that? And then decide, form your own decision if it's, from their lens and if it's applicable or not. So there's always a truth when you get feedback. It's just understanding where it's coming from and if it should be something that you prioritize or care to fix or change.
You've been at this company for 9 years. It's not the same it is technically, it's the same corporation. You get your paycheck from the same, entity and the same bank account, but it's not the same company, and therefore you can't be the same leader. So yeah, I love that you're so actively seeking feedback. Not everyone does that.
And every round, like I've always had, every time I raise capital, there's this big rush, right? Like you run a process. There's a lot of hype around it. There's a lot of adrenaline. And clearly, as a founder, you need some adrenaline. You're someone who seeks some kind of thrill. Yes, you would never do it otherwise. And so it is a big rush. And then once you close the round, I always went through a transition because it changes the company. It changes the expectation. It changes the stage of the organization and what you need to focus on. It changes the structure. Who do you bring on board? And so I always had a bit of a tough time in that month or two post closing around to kind of reset. And it was like sort of this very quiet, uncomfortable few weeks, and then to step into this new person that I needed to be for that organization at the time. And we kind of went the other way right now, where we're growing really fast. And then as we re-platform, we decided to scale back the team. We decided to scale back our go-to-market effort so we wouldn't spend too much money too fast before we nail this new platform. And so we're kind of back to being a startup mentality now, right? So I had to shift so many times through this entire journey. And it's really important to be adaptable to what the company needs you to be. And so right now I'm in front of customers. I'm selling with, a very small go-to-market team. And, but that's what the job is right now. At some point we had, I don't know, sales pods, CRO, VP sales, sales enablement, sales operations, BDRs. I mean, we don't have that right now for good reasons. And hopefully all the learnings that we've got will get us to do this better, right? And more scalable. And I think it's rare that you have sort of a second chance to growing a company, the same company again. And we have that opportunity right now.
That's amazing. So feedback is one of your inputs to help you grow as a leader. Are there others? Are you like a big reader, big podcast person? Do you have a peer group, mentors, coaches? Like what's the top of the funnel for Stephany Inc. look like to make sure that...
Well, I have on my wish list having Mark MacLeod as my coach. And so I know you and I talked, and I know it's the wrong thing to say, like, oh, the investment, it's always budget, or how do we go about this? And I don't want to be frivolous with the budget that we have. And so I do think it would pay itself, many times to have someone to talk to that can help you get out of your head. What I'd say is I do read quite a bit. I do listen to podcasts when I'm commuting. I'm part of Fresh Founders. So it's a small group of fresh.
The Ottawa group, right?
Yeah. And we make small investment in early stage companies. So I'm fortunate I get to talk to Solon and Kyle and other founders, fairly regularly. I would like to be more involved. I'm just right now, because the business needs me to be more focused, I'm definitely less involved, but that's been a great channel. And then through Stand Up Ventures, I also have the fortitude of having other female founder. And so we have a stand-up circle that we try to meet once a month. And recently we're together in person. And it was just really amazing to talk to other founders who, where you're thinking like, oh, I've got all these challenges. And you hear another founder like, holy shit, like, oh, maybe my challenges are not as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
Because we all face different challenges, right? Like there's no easy journey, and it's really important to sometimes reset and to hear from their perspective what challenges they face and vice versa. I know that I learn a lot when I mentor another founder that's asking me questions, and I'm like, in my view, my opinion, my experience may not be 100% the same, but if there's something that I've learned, or so there's a nugget that can help he or she in their journey, I feel like I can give back, because people have been so generous with me over the years. And I've definitely connected with a lot of people, like my network from when I started to now, for all facets of industry, from advisors to investors to customers to thought leaders to general people that are cheering on for me. I try to make time for coffee, lunch, or even just a quick catch up, because I learned a lot from those conversations.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's funny. The Fresh Founders, I've had Kyle on this podcast, and I remember when he just started, and now he's a part owner of the Ottawa Senators. His company clearly worked. And then Aiden from Fellow was on, and he was one of the OG
guy. Like
Fresh
such
Founders.
A nice person to talk about having someone who has a lot of humility.
Totally. And just the stories he was telling me about, like the super early days of Fresh Founders, where they'd get together with the Shopify guys and the Second Cup, and the Shopify guys would be like, hey, we've just figured out how to do AdWords, because everything was new. So it's just like an amazing group. And then another truly amazing group that you brought up is the Stand Up Ventures. And, I'm a limited partner in Fund 2, and just a longtime friend of the fund. And I witnessed, I've been involved in many funds in different capacities. And the thing that stood out for me with Stand Up is the community. Like the CEOs truly want to help each other, and you could just feel it. And of course, for those who don't know, Stand Up backs women-led technology companies. So where a woman is in the leadership team, has a meaningful position on the cap table. And, we don't have to go here if you don't want to, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, what you've experienced, as a solo female founder. Do you think there are challenges that are maybe unique to kind of coming from that background? Are there gender differences in launching and growing a fast growing company?
Yeah, there are. I mean, the numbers are there, but even if you say like, oh, there's none, Like 3% of venture-backed companies are female founders. So there is a real gap in the industry. This is my view, at least, is I think generally it's maybe not so much as being a female founder as the risk profile that we may take on when we're raising capital. That's at least one lens of it. I always think like if 4 women who had sold companies before, who had, complementary skill set, who understood the market really well and had a big opportunity with a big TAM, would raise capital together, their chances of success would probably be significantly higher. And unfortunately, a lot of women go on this journey as a solo founder and they take on a lot of risk. And it's risky if you're looking, being an investor and looking at a woman who has kids, right? Who had never built a tech company before, was this crazy idea that no one understands. I don't know that I would have invested in myself. Like, who's this crazy chick? And you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if the person has what it takes. Are they going to give up and go on to another idea? And I've seen this happen. I mentored women founders who pivoted and went off to do something else and would not, knowing or not knowing the consequences. I know women founders who had kids that were sick for a period of time or needed, them and their family needed their attention. So there's a lot of risk for anyone starting a company. And I do think being a solo founder is very high risk. And, when I was able to successfully secure capital, I found 2 executives, one a CTO, one a CEO, who had successfully exited from companies, who had background in my space, who put a check in the company and brought other investors. And that lowered my risk profile. And that's when Stand Up Venture was like, okay, we're going to invest. And so I do think that has a lot to do with it. Women tend to overshare and answer questions maybe a bit differently. And so part of my mentorship with Women Founder is changing a little bit of the narrative when you're raising capital and recruiting talent. And I had definitely that in the beginning. Like, I need money to grow my company. Well, investors are like, I don't care about that. I'm going to give you money to make a lot of money. What makes you think that you can give me a 5 or 10x return on my investment? And do you have what it takes? And so changing the narrative. And this guy, I said this on a podcast recently where this founder was like in his late 20s. He was wearing a baseball hat, and a hoodie. And he's like, Steph, you just have to be cocky with investors. I'm like, F you, like, you be cocky with investors. Like, it's not, I don't have that. I'm 46 now. I was in my late 30s and I had 3 kids. That doesn't apply to me. But the feedback was, it's about confidence, and how do I change the narrative to let investors know about the size of the opportunity? Like, why is this happening now? What market are we attaching ourselves that's growing really fast? How big is the TAM? What other industry, if you can't really understand it? For us, we're the Zoom info to the buy side of the digital enterprise. And suddenly our TAM is $62 billion. We're attaching ourselves to the BI and the source to pay market that are growing X. And we have the expertise and we have the early cut, right? Like, then it's the proof points. And it's almost like you'd be crazy or, if you don't invest, we're going to find investors and you're going to miss out on this opportunity. And so on changing the narrative, that gave me the opportunity to raise capital and create a bit of FOMO around the fact that we were raising money. So those are kind of examples, I think, of what I've seen women sort of get trapped in. And again, feedback, and look at yourself in the mirror from the eyes of an investor. If you're putting yourself and you had the money, like, what would you need to see from a founder to be able to say, like, hey, I don't want to miss out. I'm going to put 20 or 100 or $5 million on that business because I genuinely believe that they have the best chance of winning in this market and give me a big return. So it's a different mindset. And guys are just better generally at that. That's all maybe what I'm saying is that guys have this, can be cocky.
Yes.
Persona with the ego to carry that narrative. As women, we tend to be a little bit more cautious or overshare or humble, which doesn't always translate into like, hey, I'm building this massive company. I'm solving this massive problem and you should get on this train or you're going to miss out. Yeah,
100%. And, if I buy shares of, I don't know, Shopify today, I can change my mind tomorrow and sell them. But when I invest in a startup, I'm in for, a 7-10 year journey. And so it's a high risk decision. And then investors have this thing called agency risk, meaning like you are their agent to deliver them returns. It's not about them. They're just kind of along for the ride for the most part. They try and help, but they succeed through you. And so they're always looking for confirmation as to whether this is the right decision. And obviously they're doing it before they invest, but they're even doing it after they invest. And so this brings up, like, I'll bet you every VC I would ask would be like, yes, I really wish my CEOs would ask for more feedback. But it's sort of perverse. I bet, you're saying you kind of always ask for feedback. I could almost see them saying, on the one hand, this is good, but like, does she lack confidence? Do I have the right leader? So a strength suddenly becomes a concern. I generally, I can tell you for me, I only coach people who are highly self-aware, because otherwise I'm wasting my time, right? You have to, you're going to go through learning and growth every single day, not just the days you meet with a coach. And so the other side of confidence, which is needed, is cockiness. And right, if you think your shit doesn't stink, well, you're just not going to be learning, right? You're just not going to be open to feedback. Someone's going to give it to you and be like, they're wrong, and you're just not going to see it. So I don't know. I love it.
Well, I invested in Chloe Smith of recounts.ai. And actually all the investment I've made in the founder, and I know her space because it's relatively synergistic with what Tealbook does, but it's catering to very different market and use case. I don't know that space and what problem she's solving. But when we interacted, she asked really good questions. And then once we hang up the phone, she sent me a follow-up on all the questions I'd asked with very specific sort of next steps or information that I had asked her without asking. But I knew once she'd asked really good question, she also followed up and was very pointed about the questions I had to make sure I had the answer, and then proceeded to give an update to all of her investors in a very detailed, humble, very open. It's not all rosy. There are some challenges, but to me, it was more about her, right? She's coachable. She's listening. She's willing to make the changes that she needs to make or do what it takes for the business based on what the business needs. And that's what I would want from a founder. And that's what I got from the very beginning. If you ask Michelle McBain, she'd probably tell you, like, Steph was very coachable. Like, she was listening and she was applying. Not everything is applicable. And I certainly don't want all my shareholders to call me to give me feedback. But the ones at the time that I need it, I've been stepping up and I've been very valuable. And the other ones, I've managed, because I do have quite a lot of angel investors. And so from the very beginning, I set up to say, don't put your life savings in my company, because this is really high risk, and I'll do whatever it takes to make the company successful. And I'll promise I'll give you updates. But, if I get calls or text message all the time, I'm not focusing on growing the business. And if I need you for your network or for whatever reason, I'll make sure that, I'll contact you. So that's setting the expectation up front has been really valuable. And I've heard nightmare stories of, sometimes it's the investors who wrote the smallest checks that are the ones that are the neediest and have the most questions and suck some of your time. So.
Absolutely. I always, CEOs always ask me every time they're doing a round and someone wants to be an observer as an example. I'm just like, dude, observers don't just observe. If they're on the call or in the room, they're going to speak. They're going to call your directors afterwards. They completely influence the dynamic. Yeah, they're not benign, and yeah, I've definitely seen the same thing. Small angels just get some kind of Google News alert and then text the CEO freaking out. What is this? And it's just,
I said that recently in a podcast where I told an investor I was going to send his money back. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, I can't be answering your text message. If you're nervous about the check, which I get, it's a lot of money, but if you're nervous about it, I'd rather give you the money back. And then he totally left me alone. And once in a while, being like, hey, just checking in. How are you? Be great to get on a call. But, he's been really, really good about it. But that it required that at the beginning. It's like any relationship. what expectation are you setting with your investors and your board right out of the gate? Because it can be a really slippery slope.
Yep. Yeah, as we start to kind of wrap things up, maybe a couple of final questions. One is, you recently brought on a right hand to kind of run a bunch of the business. And I'll bet you many people listening, once they've gotten to a certain stage, have contemplated that. And there's a huge element of trust in it. I would love it if you could just walk us through how that happened and how you got to the comfort level to turn over, a major part of the business to this person.
Yeah, I wish I'd done it years ago, frankly. I know my strength. I can sell Tealbook. I can get people really excited and passionate. I know where we're going. I'm also really good at diagnosing. Like, I hear things and I know there's gaps. And so all the areas that need attention kind of rise to the top. And I'm less good about sort of how do we resolve it or putting process in place. And so for a long time, I've been looking for someone like that for a long time, but it was always do we need that? Like, if I have executive and they're accountable and they're operational, should that satisfy? And it was the same with a chief of staff. Like, I looked to hire a chief of staff and waited. And until I did hire chief of staff, I realized I should have done it before. But we hired Phil Garlick as president about 5-6 months ago. I had almost hired someone 2 years ago and it was the wrong fit. And so I got really excited about it. And then it just didn't feel, as we continued in the process, it felt that it would put us in the wrong direction as a company. And I was worried the culture change was going to be too dramatic. But Phil, I had met 7 years ago when he was at ZoomInfo. And the first version of Tealbook, I had tried to buy data from ZoomInfo and D&B. And I remember thinking like, oh, this guy's really sharp. Like, he just seems like a good person and very experienced in the data industry. So I had tried to get him to invest and join my board early on. He introduced me to now one of our independent board members, Marty Kahn. And then we got reconnected about maybe almost a year ago now. I was seeing sort of gaps on our go-to-market side that, it was harder because I had executive that were more experienced than me in some areas. So it's harder to push back when you don't have the same experience, even if the person reports to you and it's your vision, you're the CEO. And so I needed someone that had more experience to call out the things and help sort of shape. And in that process, you could see the team really finding what you had to bring to be valuable. It was a good fit from a culture perspective. And it was a moment where I needed, that day. Yep. Like, you want to take the reign? Because I'm good.
Yeah, here you go.
I asked him what his plans were, if he was looking to sit on boards or, do do advisory work. And he said that he still had the energy and he would absolutely join a company if it was the right role in the right company, and asked me what I had in mind. I said, I could really use someone to take the day-to-day operations. And then that would allow me to really shine and focus on the areas that I'm really good at. Because when I'm diagnosing something, then I can relate back to him, and then he can investigate, he can help enable the team to come up with a solution, right? So versus me trying to be in so many things and do it's a much better formula. And I can interact differently with my customers. I can interact differently with the team. I have more time to think. I'm involved where I need to be involved, where I can accelerate things by contacts or by industry experience or, so far so good. It's only been 6 months, but I feel, really fortunate that I was able to find someone like that. I'd say if you're on the fence and you're thinking, to have sort of the yin to your yang, some people, there's a term for the enabler or the integrator, or sort of the founder
integrator
that is more visionary. And then the person that's more on the business side, especially with the experience that he brings in, like we're already making changes to structure our user experience, how we're packaging the data because of his experience. So I think it's going to significantly accelerate us. So definitely if you're on the fence and you're thinking about it, it's probably because you need it. And just finding the right person is hard. To your point, you need to trust it. It has to be a good culture fit. And the team rallied around him really quickly, which I felt really, it's different. It's definitely a change for me, but it's a change that I think is a really good thing for the company and the business. So, and for me, I think long term will be also beneficial.
Yeah, just hearing you talk about everything he brings seems like it brings you and the company just tremendous leverage. Right. So yeah, really strategic. You brought up something really important that I bet a lot of people struggle with, which is one of the things that one of the reasons why you're interested in Phil is because you're managing leaders who are experts in their field, and you struggle, you hesitated to push back. And so I'm curious, in those situations, I bet everyone struggles with that. Did your gut know that they were going in the wrong direction? And did you basically not listen to your gut?
Yeah, many times, actually, more times than not. And you think over time I have learned to push back. And if my gut, there's sometimes a good explanation, but if I get the explanation and I walk away and I'm still feeling this way, and it's not, yeah, I heard you, but it's not changed my perception or my hunch on something. The dangerous part is when you start digging in, and that's what I had to do a few times, is start to really understand. Like one example is our ACV was getting smaller, our sales cycle was getting longer, and all I could hear is that it's the market. And so I'm not saying that the market did not influence some of those changes, but what I was not hearing is what we're going to do about it, what's within our control, what we need to change to adapt to the market if the market is challenging us with competitors or shift in priorities. And it was sort of like we're doing everything perfect, but the market is, which I was like, I smell shit.
That's total bullshit.
And it's hard because then you're like, okay, well, how am I going to understand it? And so I had to myself sit on gong calls and start listening to what was really happening. And that's hard because then the other person gets, if they're not humble, then they get defensive. And it's happened a few times in my journey where I had executives that were ego or for whatever reason got in the way. And it never ends well. And so where I've done really well with executive is the ones that are really humble and they're willing to go outside of their role to really understand, what they can do differently, bring in best practices, being willing to take more responsibilities and acknowledge when maybe it's not the right responsibilities for them, right? So it's that self-awareness and people that, are just really there for the right reasons. And so I've had some amazing experience, and people are not with us anymore for various reasons. And, I will always stay in touch, and I'm so proud that they've been able to go off to other companies and get more experience and continue to grow in their journey. Like that's a big part of hiring people and letting them go. And then, we've had people that are still with us today that I'm so fortunate to have worked with for a few years and are still very committed to the mission. So, but it's a solo founder, and I think the gender may play something in it too, because I don't have a big ego. I don't stump my foot. I don't scream at people, and so I process things, and I do think that made it more challenging for me as a leader. And I learned so much from Phil just by how he's asking questions, how he's driving accountability. And I don't know, there's sometimes I'm like, I don't know that I could actually do it even in my version of myself, the way he's doing it. And I don't know if it's a personality or gender thing. I have not solved that yet. But the version of that for female, it's often, perceived as she-man or whatever it may be. And so, and that's not me. I'm not, I'm not a bitch. I don't scream at people. And so, but being more firm, setting expectation, driving accountability for people is super important. So finding within my personality, how do I ignite that without offending or hurting people's ego, along the way?
Right.
Tricky.
Yeah, 100%. Listen, we get what we tolerate. And so you have to have high standards, but in your own way. You don't have to become someone you're not. And I think the only way you can go through a journey that's 9 years in and you're still kind of in the middle, you're at the middle of this, not in the finish line, is by being yourself. I think when people try and put on a mask and try and be, this is how I should be, that they just hate themselves.
Or they attract the wrong type of people. Ultimately, when I look around the table, now we have really humble people, very committed. It just took time to find that shape and understand how you hire people. I'm very trusting, and that's sort of, it's good and bad. I wish I was less trusting and the trust was earned over time. At times it's the opposite for me. I give all my trust and it's yours to lose.
Right.
And then when it starts to go away for various reasons, that's where it's been more challenging to navigate those relationships.
Yeah, no, I get it. Listen, I think solving for humility is the right way, right? I think ego is complete kryptonite. And if a company's doubling every year, a leader has to grow in their capacity every year. And like I said earlier, I just don't think they do it if they think they're great. So it can go the other way and you can be insecure and that slows you down. So it's, as with everything, it's a balancing act, but leaning into humility is great for me. And then also building a company around you, right? Leaning into your superpowers, who you truly are, and then surrounding yourself with people who fit that, complementary skills, but who align with kind of your view of the world. That makes it worth doing because you probably spend most of your waking hours doing this, so might as well enjoy it.
100%. And tricky when we scaled really fast. We post Series B, we hired a lot of people and lots of mistakes in scaling too fast. And so again, sort of had the opportunity to do that again, which is a bit of a gift because then we can reset on what kind of behaviors do we want to see. We always had these core values, but really living in those core behaviors and values as we're looking for new talent to come in with the right mindset, the right, skills is important, but it's more important to have the right mindset. And I've learned that also the hard way. Lots of war scars.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm hiding my gray hair.
That's right. I love it. Well, Stephany, this has been fantastic. I get to sit here and ask like 100 more questions, but I know you got a company to run. Thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. Hey, thanks for listening to the Startup CEO Show. If you'd like to connect with me, be sure to visit my website at markmacleod.me or follow me on LinkedIn at @themarkmacleod or Twitter at @markmacleod_. And if you want to tune in again next week, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.